I'd say the number one thing that people do wrong is they don't have an estate plan.
Okay.
And a lot of lawyers, especially estate planning lawyers, like to say, if you don't have an estate plan, the state of Texas has one for you.
They do. That's right.
But I think the biggest thing, most people are focused on, well, what happens when I die? I would be more concerned about what happens when something happens to me and I'm still alive.
Welcome to Southeast Texas Real Estate. I'm Andy Hemmings with Capital Title, the largest independent title company in the United States. We have offices throughout Southeast Texas and beyond to take care of your residential, commercial, and industrial real estate transactions. Welcome everybody to Southeast Texas Real Estate. My name is Andy Hemmings with Capital Title, and I'm so glad you could join us. We got a very special guest with us today, Mr. Jonathan Vernon. He is a local real estate attorney, does a lot of work with us here at Capital Title. Jonathan, thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
Yeah,
and stop lying to the people. I'm not that special.
Yeah, well, he's also very humble, a very humble man. Jonathan, just over the last couple of years, I've gotten to know you. I think we first met when I was having a real estate class, and you were one of the students in the class. And do you remember that out in Orange?
I remember that. We actually met before at a crawfish boil. That was the second time we met.
We did. That's right. But on official business, if you will, Jonathan was in the class, and it was on estates and probate. And as he started talking, I realized, I need to let this guy I need to let him kind of take over here. So I loved having you there in the class. And since then, you've attended a lot of other classes with us. And I love the information that you're able to provide for the local real estate community.
I like the information you're able to provide because, as you know, the title companies don't exactly follow the law. They follow what keeps the company safe.
That's right.
Because it's insurance.
That's right.
So they don't want unacceptable risks.
Yep.
And one of the things title companies do is they want a doctor to say that the person was mentally competent when they executed a power of attorney. And
right.
None of my, CLEs or anything ever said that this was something that your client might need.
CLE?
So, continuing legal education.
Okay, all right.
They actually call them MCLEs because it's minimum.
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 Okay.
Because you have a certain number of hours you have to have. And they're like, yeah, but you could have more.
Yeah.
So what I did is I've started with every client who comes in and does a power of attorney. They also get a piece of paper three pieces of paper to bring to their doctor to go through and check off and put notes on saying that they were mentally competent to execute a power of attorney and other estate planning documents.
And that's a business measure that you put in as a result of working with title companies, knowing that eventually that we're going to need that to close transactions for them?
Exactly, especially for people because when you execute a power of attorney, you're mentally competent, or hopefully.
Right.
And you won't be mentally incompetent for several years, maybe a few decades.
Right.
And then the doctor who treated you at that time could very well be dead.
Yeah.
And then who are you going to get to sign that piece of paper saying you were mentally competent at the time you executed the document? Yeah.
So that's a great opening point there, that what the title company does and our requirements are often above what the law requires or in addition to what the law requires, because as you said, we are a risk-based business, and so there's additional measures that need to be put into place. And so we like it when working with attorneys like you who understand that, and when you are working with your customers, you're paving the way for the future. So that's great.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I like working with Capital Title is y'all make it clear to me what y'all need. So if I'm drafting an affidavit of heirship for somebody who's passed away, I can do that knowing Capital Title's requirements for it and put all the things in there so that it's not useless in 20 or 30 years when they need to sell the property they didn't want to sell when mom passed away.
And man, we see a lot of useless ones that just were not drafted to our standard, for lack of a better way of putting it. So thank you for that.
I see a lot of those too.
Yeah. I don't know if you get them at Office Depot or something or what, but there's some forms out there that say affidavit of heirship that they just don't have everything you need. And we'll definitely dive into that more. Jonathan, as I've gotten to know you, I've learned that your family has a very rich history here that I find just fascinating. So we're going to definitely circle back to all the legal information, but I think your background here in this area, it makes you just a compelling professional. And so tell us a little bit about that history.
So my family came here, I think it was in the 1830s, and that was George Washington O'Brien. And right before the Civil War, he became an attorney, and like right before. So quickly, so close to the beginning of the Civil War that he didn't start practicing law till after the Civil War. During the Civil War, before the Civil War, he voted against secession. He didn't think Texas should leave America.
Okay.
And but the way things worked back then is if you were a moral person, the view was you went with your state. Your first loyalty was with your state. So after the rest of the state said, no, we're gonna leave, he joined the Texas Army and eventually became a captain. And so for the rest of his days and beyond, he was known as Captain O'Brien.
Okay.
And
name sounds kind of familiar.
Yeah, that my middle name is O'Brien.
Okay.
And it's from that part of the family history.
Okay.
My grandparents had a habit of putting last names as middle names in the family. Like my little sister has my grandmother's maiden name and that sort of thing. And he was my great-great-great-grandfather, and he was the first attorney who lived in Beaumont.
Wow. That's quite a pedigree you have.
Yes, sir. And, he had son-in-laws who were attorney. One of them was my great-great-grandfather, and he became mayor of Beaumont until he was shot in the back by opposing counsel outside of the courthouse.
Oh, my. Wow.
Yeah. And, the people think that all this violence and stuff is a new thing, but it was much more rough and tumble back then. But anyway, back to Captain O'Brien. After the Civil War, nobody had any money. The South was impoverished. So he got paid in land one time. That land turned out to be a piece of Spindletop Hill. And this was well before it struck. And so after that, Patty O'Higgins came into his office and said, I want to buy that piece of land from you. And he said, okay, well, why do you want to buy it from me? And Patty O'Higgins explained, there's oil under that hill, I'm sure of it, da-da-da-da. And he said to him, well, come back tomorrow morning. I want to think about it overnight, and then I'll give you my answer. Patty O'Higgins comes back the next morning and says to him, and he says to him, I'm not going to sell you the land, but I will sell it to a company that maintains the mineral rights to this land.
Okay.
And that company is still in existence. Oil's still being produced out of Spindletop Hill. There's pipelines running across the land, and all sorts of activity still going on. And,
that's amazing.
And even though Captain O'Brien had like 10 or 11 children, my mom still owns stock in the company, is still getting paid money off of that. That's it's not going to make anybody rich, but it's nice to have.
Definitely.
Might put a new roof on the house every now and then, or something like that. Maybe.
Yeah.
But
the
that's
fact
nice
that it's
to
been
have.
producing that income for now well over 100 years.
My uncle, who's very passionate about family history, it does go on about how when other people in the company are like, well, we need to squeeze more money out of it. He's like, don't sell things off. Don't do any of that. This is just giving us a lot of free college education.
Yeah.
And there's basically two families who own stock in the company. And he's saying, it's given these two families plenty of free education over the years. And it's just free money that God handed us.
Yeah.
We don't need to, get greedy about it.
Exactly. Yeah. When you've got that type of cash flowing asset like that, it may not be in perpetuity, but it could very well be for many, many, many more years to come.
I mean, it's been 123 years now.
Yeah. Since Spindletop hit, that's right.
That's a pretty good investment.
That's a pretty good investment, definitely. All right.
And it's not an investment, it's an inheritance for everybody since him.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's fascinating. I love that you have a rich history here and that you're carrying on that legacy of law practice here. And so tell me when you opened your law practice here again.
I opened it here. It's hard to remember, but so I was in Houston for 3 years after I graduated. I graduated in 2010.
Okay.
So what's that? 2004. I came back here, and that's when I started here.
Okay, very good. And
2014. I made myself 10 years older.
Okay, 2014. All right, that sounds okay. Yeah, I got you. Okay, and you have an office right here in Beaumont.
Yep, I'm in downtown Beaumont. Hopefully very soon I'll be at a different location in downtown Beaumont. I'm building my own office in downtown.
Okay.
Like my own building that's mine.
Yeah.
Instead
that's
of renting.
Great. Yeah. Great. Very good. And so your main practice is with real estate, right? And so tell me what made you go in that particular direction of law. Was it because of your family history, or is it just something that interested you?
So my grandparents on my mom's side were both lawyers in Louisiana. My dad got a job out here at the plants. I had no idea for years that the family was from here, and that the only generation of my family going back to Captain O'Brien who didn't live here was my grandfather's generation. But my dad got a job out here at the plants, so pulled back by the same thing that got the family started.
Yeah.
And so that's why I'm back here. But my grandfather was a real estate attorney. And so I was a little bit interested in real estate for that reason. But the real reason I got into it was I graduated in 2010. In 2008, there was that financial crisis. And
I remember that.
In 2009, all my friends who were a year ahead of me in law school, who had the offers for the six-figure jobs at the big law firms where, it's, kind of life would be set on easy except for work. Work was going to be hard, but they were going to...
They put in some hours.
Yeah, they put in a lot of hours, but they were going to make the money for it.
Right.
And those people, who I was about at the same place in, class rankings as, except they were a year ahead of me, they were getting their job offers taken back.
Because of the great financial crisis?
Yeah, it took like a year for it to hit the law firms.
Okay.
Because law firms are kind of reactive to, the economy. You've got your problems.
Little lag time.
Yeah, there's a lag time.
Yeah.
You have your problems. You have your legal problems, and you get your lawyers working on it. Then when the financial problems hit, well, you've already set up your deal with your lawyers to go through, so there's that lag time.
Yeah, gotcha.
And so I didn't even get the job offers to the big law firms with the fancy pay and the fancy offices
because they weren't
downtown
hiring.
Houston, because they were firing. They weren't hiring, they were firing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know if they were actually firing people, but people who had offers.
Mm-hmm.
Those offers had been revoked the year before, so they weren't given any offers to my class. The people who got jobs were people whose dad was a partner in a law firm.
Yeah.
And so there was no jobs out there for me, but a friend of mine who was much older, he was retiring from his probate practice. He was a real estate agent and a estate planning probate real estate attorney. And so all of a sudden I had a source of cases.
Okay.
Of probate cases.
Ready to go, ready for you to work on.
Ready to go. So I started on the estate planning and probate stuff. And I'll ask you, what do you think people's number one asset is that they have to deal with when someone passes away?
Their house.
Yep, it's real estate.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're doing probate or estate planning, you need to know at least a little about real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you have to know a little about real estate and take care of all these real estate problems, you might as well also just do real estate. Don't wait for somebody to be in the estate planning probate situation. Just anyone who needs real estate work. So that's how I got into real estate.
Okay. And so since then, and since you've opened that practice, what's a typical customer that would come to you? And I know there's probably a wide spectrum of customers that you serve, but if you could identify maybe 2 or 3 of the most common services that you provide, what would those be?
So the most common is real estate in conjunction with estate planning. Somebody says, I want someone to have this piece of property when I pass away. And, we figure out the best way to do that. Or someone comes into me and they're doing estate planning, and it turns out they have 6 rental properties held in their name. And it's like, oh, well, you're in a situation where if you get sued big time on one of those properties, you lose all those properties.
Yeah, people don't know that.
Let's do something to eliminate that liability.
Good.
Or mitigate it. You can't eliminate any liability.
Right.
You can mitigate it. You're in the liability mitigation business.
Correct.
That's what a title company does.
Right.
And you say, we do our best to eliminate any liability, and we've got you covered if we did a bad job of it. Which is why if you're ever buying land, especially from a stranger, someone you don't know, or someone you don't know well, go to Capital Title and get yourself a policy.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, at the very least, a title company looks at everything and makes sure everything is in order.
Right.
And they're going to do a better job of it than someone like me, and they're going to do a better job of it than just someone on the street, because that's what you do every day.
That's what we're set up to do. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's one of the services you provide is estate planning in conjunction with real estate that they own. If as you're just looking at the general populace out there, what would you say is the main thing where people go wrong? Like like the main piece of advice you could give to someone in working with it, why they need to hire an attorney, a real estate attorney, and a probate attorney?
I'd say the number one thing that people do wrong is they don't have an estate plan.
Okay.
And a lot of lawyers, especially estate planning lawyers, like to say, if you don't have an estate plan, the state of Texas has one for you.
They do. That's right.
But I think the biggest thing, most people are focused on, well, what happens when I die? I would be more concerned about what happens when something happens to me and I'm still alive, going back to that power of attorney. The power of attorney just says this person or this series of people can conduct business on my behalf.
Right.
It gets a lot more complicated than that, which is why you need to hire an attorney and not just do it, print off the statutory form and do it yourself. One of the reasons is if you execute it in an attorney's office, you can deal with a bank and get a mortgage on that piece of real estate. If you don't do it in an attorney's office, I think it's a broker or a real estate broker or a bank's office. It might be a title company. I don't know the other. I know one of them is in a bank, and I don't know what the third one is because that's not my business. I don't do that all the time.
Okay.
I'm the attorney. If you do it in my office, you're good.
Right.
Your agent can then go get that loan and do that paperwork. So like, in our current situation with high interest rates, you execute a power of attorney, and then in 30 years when your son or daughter or whoever you choose to be your agent needs to refinance that loan you got today, because interest rates are back to 2% if that ever happens again. Probably not, but it might go down to like 3 or 4.
I would love that.
So your agent needs to refinance it so your payments go down drastically.
Yeah.
Well, they wouldn't be able to do that if you made a valid power of attorney that you just printed up yourself and signed in your home.
Yeah. And the power of attorney, it's not a very complicated document, but like you said, it has to be done. It has to be drafted correctly. And, at Capital Title, what we can do, our attorneys can prepare power of attorneys for a transaction. Let's say a seller is going to be out of town. And it's, so this is outside the estate planning issue. But, we have a seller that's going to be out of town, can't make it in for closing. So we go ahead and have them execute a power of attorney so somebody can sign on their behalf. But that, you mentioned that the number one mistake people make is not having an estate plan. And I think most people probably think that I don't have enough money, estate plan, that's for rich people, or for wealthy with people with high net worth. What would you say to that?
Well, I mean, if you have young children, an estate plan is for you, because if you pass away, your children will inherit from you. And if they're below the age of 18, they're not allowed to inherit from you. And so you went from, and if you own something, you have an estate.
Yeah.
An estate is just
exactly
a collection of property. So if you own anything, especially anything with a title on it, like a car or a home or a bank account, and you have young children, if you have children below the age of 18, you need a will if you're going to pass away. And you don't know when you're going to pass away. Most people don't pass away when they have young children, but some people do.
That's right. Yeah. And, to people that say, I don't know about, incurring the cost of doing an estate plan. Let me tell you what, if you think in estate planning, it's not terribly expensive, but if you think the cost of an estate plan is expensive, try the cost of not having one.
Yeah, especially if we're, like, a power of attorney is the simplest thing you can do.
Right.
I don't recommend you just go with the simplest thing you can do. You probably want to do a little bit more than that.
Yeah.
But a power of attorney, I'm going to charge you for hours of my time at the minimum. You might come into my office and take up a whole bunch of my time, and I'm going to charge you for it.
Yeah.
But I can get it done in an hour. And that's meeting with you, drafting it, executing it, giving you copies of it.
Yeah.
And I'll charge you $400, which is my hourly rate. And then you've prevented a situation where you become mentally incompetent and need a guardianship. You come into my office for a guardianship, I'm going to say, well, I need a down payment of $5,000.
Right.
I think that's what it's going to cost, but there's a good chance it'll cost more than that.
Yeah, and a guardianship, we've run into that situation with closings here where the person was mentally incapacitated and they did not have a power of attorney. And so the son had to set up a guardianship. And it was well in excess of $5,000, and it took a long time to do it.
Yeah.
So such a simple measure that can be taken. And that visit, when they come to visit you in the office, them visiting with you, you're able to ask them questions that they hadn't even thought about. You're able to kind of probe them for information and make sure that it does whatever you're preparing for them meets their needs.
And one thing that I've seen is a lot of people are surprised that community property is community property. It doesn't matter if it's your paycheck and your bank account and you were the only one in the marriage working. All that money in your bank account, if you have stepchildren, your spouse's children inherit when your spouse dies.
Right.
Or when they die. So I've had a lot of people really angry that all the money they worked for all these years, they had to split with these children who never visited dad or mom.
Now, are you referring to a situation where the deceased person did not have a will?
Right. They didn't have a will.
They didn't have a will. So when you don't have a will and you had children from a prior marriage, they inherit your estate. And so many people don't know that.
Yeah, and so, like, if you have stepkids, that's another one who you don't have to have a lot of money. You need a will. And the truth is, if you have a lot of money, you kind of need a will less.
Okay.
Because let's say you got
That's interesting.
$3 million in liquid assets.
Okay.
Well, you can afford to give half of that away. I mean, unless you're living on the edge because you're just living at large. But if you've saved up that money, it's not going to be fun. But you could afford to give half of that away, and still, you'd probably have to downsize your house, and it would not be good. But you would not be in the bread line after giving half of your stuff away.
Right. It's a good point. Very good point.
But if you got $10,000 in the bank and you're going paycheck to paycheck to pay off that mortgage, if you have to give away half the money in your bank account, you're all of a sudden
you're broke.
You might be bankrupt.
Yeah, gotcha. Good point. So the like when have a transaction here at Capital Title, we try to handle a lot of the legal work as much as we can, especially in a situation where there was a married couple, they owned a house together. One of them passes away and didn't have a will. Now we have to do what's called an affidavit of heirship.
Yes,
and something
I'm going to interrupt you.
Okay, sure.
If somebody comes to me and they're like, mom passed away or my wife passed away, whoever passed away, we need to get the situation taken care of. And I find out that it's not a situation that necessarily calls for a probate.
Okay.
A probate is where you go in front of the county judge and you prove either the heirs or the beneficiaries of the estate. The heirs are the people who Texas says get the stuff, and the beneficiaries are the people your will says get the stuff. And the will trumps what the state of Texas says.
Okay.
And so if there's a situation where it's like, well, you're going to spend $2,500 minimum probating a will. If all you have that needs to be probated to go through the probate is the home, well, that can be taken care of with an affidavit of heirship.
Good point. Yeah.
And so I follow that up with, well, are y'all planning on selling the home in a reasonably quick manner. And I kind of define that as 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
If you're holding it on for longer than 2 or 3 years, I tell them, let me draft an affidavit of heirship, and then we can record it, and you don't have to go and find those relatives or those neighbors who capital title will accept as witnesses on the affidavit of heirship.
Yeah.
But if they're like, oh, well, we plan on selling it immediately. None of us live here anymore. There's no use for the house. What I say is find a realtor, and they'll take you to their title company that they use all the time. And that title company I know capital title, last time I checked, was $250 for an affidavit of heirship.
Yeah, very reasonable.
Extreme. I don't know. It's not reasonable. It's too low. I don't understand how y'all do it.
Bill Shattuck would love to hear you say that.
So y'all charge $250 to get it done, and y'all know exactly what y'all's requirements are. And if y'all have changed y'all's requirements since the last time I've talked to y'all about them, y'all would know that, whereas I wouldn't. So I say, well, go to, get your real estate agent and sell the house, and the title company will provide it for you for about $1,000 less than I will.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what we do. We try to clear things up as much as we can in-house as a service to our customers, and that's the way we're organized. That's the way we're set up. We have teams of attorneys to do it. However, sometimes situations arise where it's beyond our control or our ability to manage whatever needs to be cured in title. And I think you recently did some work for us in that regard, and I believe it was a partition.
Yes.
Partition. So tell us about that.
I'll put it this way. I did some work with y'all, not for y'all, because I'm not capital title's attorney. I did it for my client.
That's an attorney right there.
So my client's parents passed away. I'm going to try to use gender neutral language.
Okay.
Because I don't like to give any hints as to who my client was.
All right, we're going to keep it totally on the DL.
Exactly. So my client's parents had passed away. My client had 2 siblings, one of whom had just disappeared. And it had been like 12 years since the last parent's passing.
Okay.
And so we had 2 options. We can do an administration, or we can do a partition. And they were both going to cost probably about the same thing. And so we went with the partition because it could be quicker.
Okay. And
we actually got the partition pretty quick, but it took forever to get the house sold.
Yeah.
And the house wasn't in great condition. And in a partition, you go to the judge and you say, Judge, we think the house is worth this much. And if there's someone on the other side, they will say, Judge, we think the house is not worth that much. It's worth, and you can have a fight about it. But we didn't have a fight about it because the other sibling is gone. No one can find them. And in that case, we got the order. We set it for what I told my client is like, come up with a low-ball number, because we don't want to have to come back here and have the judge reduce the number, because we can't sell it for less than that. And one of the real estate agents who works with capital title all the time brought me this client.
Okay.
And so we got that real estate agent and broker appointed as the broker to sell the property for that amount. It sold for that amount on the dollar.
Oh,
because it was, and it might not have been worth that much. It was not in great shape.
Okay.
And so there was all this trouble getting that done, and because it'd been 12 years since the last parent passed away, my client working with capital title had a really hard time finding witnesses for that affidavit of heirship.
Yeah.
I think it might have been multiple affidavits of heirship because there were siblings who'd passed away before mom.
Yeah.
And so capital title was like, well, we want to make sure they passed away before mom. We need an affidavit of heirship. And because my client waited so long to take care of mom's estate, it was hard to find those witnesses. That's why I tell people, do something soon.
Yeah.
As soon as somebody passes away, you need to start looking at what you need to do.
Yeah.
Because there are time limits, some practical, some legal. For example, if you have a will, you have to probate it within 4 years of the person's passing. Now, that's not a 100% rule. There are some exceptions, and those exceptions are narrow. So don't think, oh, there's exceptions, I can wait around.
Plan on it being a 4-year rule.
Yeah. And
gotcha.
4 years is a long time to wait to get things started. The IRS has time limits for that last tax return and that sort of thing. And,
Okay.
banks have their limits and all
Yeah.
that.
Well, the level of services that you provide, somebody, how does someone get in touch with you if they want you to go to work for them, or at least talk about what you can do for them?
Okay. You can Google Jonathan Vernon.
Okay.
And you can find my website that way.
And it's Jon.
Yeah, JONATHAN. Vernon, VERNON, like Mount Vernon. Apparently named after a different ancestor of mine.
Okay.
At least that's what my dad says. Or you can call me at 409-727-4847.
Perfect. And we'll put all this information in the show notes too.
And
Yeah.
you can also text me at that number.
Okay. Yeah. And you're really good about responding to texts.
Yeah, texts are easier to respond to than email because your phone goes off in your hand and
Yeah.
there it is.
Yeah. Well, anything else that you want to add, or any that you would want the good people of Southeast Texas to know?
Get an estate plan. You're going to need one. You're going to die. I guarantee it. What I like to say is when people are like, well, who is your customer base? And, well, it's anyone who knows someone who's going to die or is going to die themselves. So everybody twice.
That's right. That's a good point. Jonathan, I really appreciate you joining us. I appreciate our working with you with Capital Title here. And y'all be sure to reach out to him. He's been a tremendous help to our customers. He's been just a great resource for us here in Southeast Texas. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.